Are all people who experience homelessness street involved?
Well, it goes back to, how you define homelessness. Homelessness can range at least, three different dimensions. One would be people that are on the verge of losing their housing. You ask a person, who might be staying with friends, or you might be in a rooming house, and you ask them, where are you going to go next week? They say, I do not know. So that is something that I would define as being homeless. They're not on the streets homeless, but they're on their way to being on the streets homeless. So that's an important point. Another one would be young people who are sort of couch surfing. They're not paying rent. They're staying with families. They're staying, or relatives are staying with maybe friends, but that's short term, and often their welcome is worn out and they have to leave. So I would call that certainly a version of homelessness. And then one that comes to mind most often would be those young people who are using services for homeless people. Maybe they're staying in youth shelters, using youth drop-in centers, that sort of thing. That certainly is homelessness. And of course, people that are sleeping, outside, people that are sleeping on rooftops, sleeping, in building, doorways, etc. That's also homelessness. So I think if you've got to sort of look at homelessness on a broad spectrum to understand, are all people who experience homelessness street involved? So I'd say some are, some aren't. Another thing to keep in mind here is that you're talking about street involvement. What comes to mind in homelessness, usually you think about urban homelessness. A few years ago, the General Social Survey in Canada, which is a large survey done every 5 years in the country, they interview around 20,000 Canadians, and they ask them a whole host of questions. Well, in 2014, the General Social Survey for the first time asked a sample of Canadians if they'd ever experienced homelessness in their lifetime. And basically, it's the first time that the question was answered or asked in the survey, so it wasn't all that detailed. It was more or less a yes or no answer. But they found, and I did some research on this using the data, that people from small communities in rural areas, including youth, were more likely to say that they had been homeless in their lifetime than people living in cities. So usually when you think about street involvement, you think about cities, but kids who are homeless in rural areas, they're homeless, but street involvement, in a small community is very different than street involvement in perhaps a city like Toronto. So I think you've got to look at the broad picture of what street involvement means and how you define homelessness to really adequately address that kind of a question.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because there's sort of I think, again, a public misconception that there's no homelessness in small communities or in rural communities, that, people will go to the big city for support. Yeah. But, it's an important message.
Yeah, people go back and forth. Oftentimes people leave a rural area, head to a city, usually looking for employment or certain opportunities. They may not be able to find them, and they go back. So it's just migratory patterns that are often evident in many people who are homeless from rural areas. That's another important point to look at, is the pattern of, it's very transitional. It's not as though they're just sitting in one spot and staying there. Oftentimes they're moving quite a lot, and that's an important point to look at.
Yeah, moving a lot over time and also in a given day, as people sort of are using services or trying to meet those basic needs, as you said.
Yeah.